That is recording already? Yes, okay. Don't know if that was in frame at all, but you know.
Why did you make me so little, T?
That was an accident. This tea making session did not go well.
Okay. Hello everyone. Today I thought I would do a bit of a catch up with my reading. Since I haven't been making YouTube videos for quite a while now, you guys may not be up to date with what I'm reading unless you follow me on Goodreads, but I'm assuming most of you don't do that. And so yeah, this is just going to be a really quick, this is what I've been reading for the past couple of months. I can't be bothered to talk about all the books I've read this year, but I thought I would talk about what I've been reading since moving to Trondheim and up till now. So the first important thing to mention is that when we moved to Trondheim, I was doing a bit of a Harry Potter marathon. I have all of the audiobooks, so I was listening to that while we were packing and while we were moving, and then also for quite a few weeks and probably months after moving here as well, because there are quite a few books and there are quite a few hours of audiobook to listen to, but I really enjoyed that as always. And I found it quite nice and calming to have something familiar to listen to while doing something as unfamiliar as moving. The first physical book I picked up in this apartment, however, was this one by Haruki Murakami. I've tried to pronounce that name so many times correctly now that I'm just going to give up there. I also have no idea how to pronounce the title of this book. This is the complete trilogy in one book, so as you can see, I've only read the first one. I am a bit unsure if I'm going to be picking up the second two, however, because I found the first one to be very odd and difficult to get into. In this instance, I feel like I would appreciate the writing in the world a lot more if I would have been given a bit more information, because I didn't feel like I was learning enough to understand what was going on in the story, and that just meant that I was still wondering about what happened a couple of chapters ago when new stuff happened, and then I didn't understand that either. Maybe I'm just stupid, but this book was not for me and I ended up giving it 2 stars. To battle the slight reading slump I got from that book, I ended up picking up this book. This is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becca Chambers. It is a character-driven sci-fi about a crew on board a ship who have to travel to a planet quite far away. I think it takes them about 6 months to get there. This book then explores how different people from different species all have to live together in a big metal box for 6 months. I found it really unique and interesting. I loved the overall world that was being built. I really enjoyed all the characters and their differences, and I love the overall acceptance that comes from this book. So yeah, I love this and I ended up giving it 4 stars. After reading such an amazing book, I sadly went back into a little reading slump with this book. This is The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks. Brent Weeks is a very popular fantasy author, and I know it's not because of this series but because of another one of his series, but I ended up picking up this series because it sounded interesting. However, this fantasy was just so full of tropes and it was badly written. I feel like it was written by someone who had read a lot of fantasy and also wanted to write fantasy, but who didn't really understand what writing was yet. I have no idea if his other books are good, but all the characters in this book just felt made up, and you could tell that he was just basing them off his own favorite characters and that he was giving them certain character traits or certain tropes just to make them sound cool or look cool, and that really got on my nerves. However, for some weird reason, I ended up actually finishing this book and I gave it 2 stars in the end just because I managed to pull through and actually read it, so there must have been something interesting about it. But overall, I was quite disappointed in this book. After reading that, I had to pick up something I knew I would love, so I ended up picking this Savage Song by V.E. Schwab. V.E. Schwab is another one of my go-to authors. I absolutely love her. This is actually Tom's copy. I bought it for him at some point, I can't remember when, but you can tell that it's Tom's copy just by looking at it because it's slightly dirtier and slightly just more wrinkled than my paperbacks. Anyway, this was another brilliant V.E. Schwab book. It is about a divided city where there are monsters and humans, and I believe Victoria Schwab herself describes it as a book about a monster who wants to be human and a human who wants to be a monster. Definitely a very, very interesting, character-driven story. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars and I cannot wait to read the next one. The next book I have, I actually listened to on audiobook. It's called The Supernaturalists by Owen Colfur. For those of you who might not know, Owen Colfur wrote the Artemis Fowl series, which I adore. I listened to them on repeat as a child, just as much as I listened to Harry Potter. I've also read a couple of other books by Owen Colfur, and I've always found myself slightly disappointed, obviously because I have such high expectations after reading Artemis Fowl. This was another one of those cases, but I feel like I can forgive the book a little just because it was so clearly not written for me. It was very much a middle grade story. I did, however, find some enjoyment in it, and so I ended up giving it 3 stars. Perfectly fine to listen to when doing the dishes. Then after reading all of that fantasy, I finally picked up a contemporary book, which was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. Now, you've heard loads about this already, so I'm not going to talk about it in depth. I will, however, just say that I thoroughly enjoyed it. Once again, we have a struggling main character who's very interesting to read from. The story itself isn't that amazing, but obviously that's not the main purpose of this book either. The purpose is to explore the main character, and that I think it does brilliantly. I was going to give this 4 out of 5 stars, but the ending really struck me, so I ended up giving it 5 stars. Then another book that I listened to on audiobook, but I actually have the physical copy here, so I will show it to you, was Skulduggery Pleasant by Derek Landy. Skulduggery Pleasant is a series I've heard a lot of people read in their childhood. I, however, did not read it then, but I found it on Storytel, which is where I listen to my audiobooks, and I was in the mood for some middle grade after reading the Supernaturalists, so I picked this up, and I really enjoyed myself. It was a fun ride with some quirky characters, nothing extraordinary about it, but I had a lot of fun, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane with my friend Petra. We did a buddy read together where we discussed things after almost every chapter, and that was, as always, a lot of fun. I really liked this book. I found it very different and very interesting. I love the writing style. I haven't read any Neil Gaiman before, so this was very interesting for me. However, I will say there was something missing for me about the book. I can't really put my finger on why. In the end, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because I really had a good time reading it, but I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was missing. Then after that, I started my Brandon Sanderson binge, which I've talked about in quite a few videos already by now, so I'm going to go through these really quickly. First off, I read Elantris, and I had a lot of fun. This is the first, standalone book that I've read by Sanderson, and I didn't really know how I was going to feel about that, but I loved it. The only problem, obviously, being that I now want to read way more about these characters. This is about a world where people randomly get turned into gods. However, where the story takes place in this book, whatever it is that's transforming people into gods has now started transforming them into creatures of death, I guess, instead. So the people who fall for this disease all get locked together in the god's old city, and they all have to survive there. So in this book we follow 3 main characters, one being the person who falls for this disease, the other being the person who was going to marry that person, and finally we follow a priest from another nation who's come to overthrow the nation he is now in. I think my favourite part of this book were the dynamics between the 3 main characters, and though the main plot could be argued to be a lot smaller than the ones in his other books, the revelations by the end made them so much bigger than you realized when starting reading the book, so I think it's definitely worth picking this one up. I obviously gave it 5 stars. While reading Elantris, I was also listening to the second Skulduggery Pleasant book, which is Playing with Fire. This one I didn't enjoy as much. I'm not quite sure why. It might have been that I was just more distracted while listening to it this time, but I didn't find the story as engaging. The characters were still fun, but I kind of lost the plot at certain points and couldn't follow along as well, so this one I ended up giving 3 stars. And after that, I ended up marathoning the last 2 books in the second Mistborn era, which again, obviously, I really enjoyed. I gave the second one 4 stars and the third and last one 5 stars. I think the last book in this series really just heightened the stakes of the Mistborn series, and I can't wait to find out more. And then finally, I read Mistborn Secret Histories, which is a short story which just describes a bit more what happens in the main Mistborn series. I found it a lot of fun. I was reunited with characters that I read about long ago, and once again I gave it 5 stars. So yeah, those are all the books that I have read so far in this apartment. I hope you enjoyed being caught up on my reading again. I will definitely try to do more reading wrap-ups. Perhaps not every month because I don't read as much as I used to because of school and everything, but I will try to do my best and at least do them more often than once every 6 months. But yeah, that was all for now, and I will see you tomorrow for the last video of 12 Days of Christmas. Bye.